Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for standing by and welcome to a new webinar organized by Johan Cruyff Institute, in which we will be talking about organization of international sporting events. This is Gemma, your host for today's session. I hope you are all doing good and stay safe. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Mark Mateer, our guest speaker today. Mark is the CEO of Quantum Consultancy and an expert in the strategic and operational planning of major events and multi-sports games. He's engaged in an advisor on a number of major projects and events, guiding right owners, organizing committees, and host cities on the optimal approach to event planning, delivery, and legacy. As always, just a quick reminder before we get started. If you have any technical issues, we will be happy to assist you through the chat tab located on the right side of the screen. We invite you to participate on the debate, type in your questions anytime during Mark's presentation, and I will address them to him. Please write on the questions tab, also located on the top right of the screen. Good afternoon, Mark.
Hi, Gemma. Thank you very much for that introduction. I appreciate it. It makes me sound very important, so hopefully I'm able to live up to that high billing you've just given me.
Yes, we can hear you very well. Perfect. The floor is yours. Whatever you want, you can start with the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I suppose the first thing I would like to do is welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank the Cruyff Institute for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to everybody. I'm very pleased to see so many have engaged from all over the world, and hopefully we'll be able to take you through some of the challenges facing the sport events in this day and age and what it might look like in the future. As Gemma mentioned, I'd like this to be more of a discussion rather than a lecture format. I'd like this to be a two-way street in which I'm providing information, opening up ideas, so that you can actually feedback and we can have a more open discussion on it. I think the key factor here is that we're in unprecedented times, certainly within the sports industry and the event industries. Nobody knows for sure what that's going to look like in the future. So the idea here is to discuss that, to open up new ideas, and inspire you and us to go off and look for solutions and drive the industry forward. So that's the aim of today. As you can see, I'm going to approach that in three separate stages. The idea being that we look at the current situation, probably pre-COVID-19, what was the sport industry looks like, what it was doing, then moving into the challenges that are facing the sports industry at this point in time. You know, the ability to deliver events is massively diminished and how the industry is reacting to that. Then move secondly, really, what are the innovations and strategies that are happening right now? What are rights owners, what are federations, leagues doing? The answer is obviously not a lot because of the lockdown measures, but there are a few innovating, and I'd like to just give you some background on that. You may have examples of your own, but just to give you an idea of how some rights owners are actually using this to deliver new and different content. And then the final stage will be to look at the future, okay? This is the key thing. So we're in a difficult, challenging period. You know, we're all dealing with a crisis in a different way, I assume. You know, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you all are following the measures put in place. But I understand that that's very challenging for a lot of people. So the idea would be to work in the sport and events industry to ensure that we can begin to compete again, begin to create content, begin to get our leagues and our competitions going. What might that look like? What different things might we do in order to do that? I think the key point here is that sport need to take responsibility for this. We need to be proactive. We need to go out there and put things in place to show our governments and our leaders that sport is ready to go, that we can begin to host events again. Okay, that's incredibly important. I think if we're passive and we wait for regulations to change and governments to change policy, then I think it could be a very long time before we're able to resume normal competition and host events like we were. But you know, there is a trade-off there, and we have to be mindful of the public health, but also try and do as much as we can as an industry to ensure that we can go out there and begin again. Okay, so with that in mind, Gemma did give you a little bit of background on me. I'm just going to expand on that slightly. As she mentioned, I am CEO of Quantum Consultancy. Quantum is a sports consultancy organization that is data-driven. We use bespoke research, analysis, evaluation, impact reports in order to inform our strategy. So we have a number of clients, in terms of leagues, federation, organising committees, rights owners, destinations, government agencies, and such like. And instead of the traditional strategic consultancy, based purely on experience, we bring to the table a whole set of tools to use the data that's available within the sport industry to inform those decisions, and then allow those to be implemented into your strategic and operational planning to take those customers, clients of ours forward. Given the situation, there's a lot more contingency planning happening. There's a lot more people looking to protect their rights, protect what they own, and develop for the future. So a lot of what we've done is probably moving, changing, in a lot of ways. Some of the things that we do in terms of host identification, putting strategies together to put the right destination at the right sport event, so that both parties are maximizing their impact in regard to their KPIs. That's become a lot more difficult. We'll touch on why that is in the future. Part of the presentation, host cities are being challenged, rights owners are being challenged. So it's not the same proposition as it might have been a couple of months ago. Just again on me, 20 plus years experience in the sport event industry. I know many of you won't believe that because I look so youthful, but it's true. I've worked across the world. I've worked directly with international federations, organising committees, you name it. I've had input into many of these things, and just some of the events I've worked on just from that perspective: Olympic, European, Asian, Pan American, Commonwealth Games, World, Regional, Continental, National Championships. So I've got a very varied experience. I've delivered sporting events, major sporting events, in a whole range of different countries with different cultures, working with different governments and different challenges. So things as diverse as, obviously the UK, where I'm from, and then time in Azerbaijan or Turkmenistan, time in Samoa and the Pacific Islands, time in South America, in Lima, in Rio, in Santiago. So again, a lot of experience across the board there that informs some of the discussion today, informs my experience. And I suppose it's just worth noting that if anybody's trying to pick the accent, I'm originally from Northern Ireland, currently in Edinburgh, Scotland, but having lived across the globe. So I do apologise if my accent is challenging for some of you, but hopefully we'll get through this okay today. So before I begin, I suppose it's important just to put on the line, I need to discuss certain topics today in relation to sport and the event industries, and I will delve into certain elements, but I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist, and I'm definitely not a clairvoyant. I cannot see the future, okay? Anybody at this point in time that says they can, I would be very cynical. I wouldn't necessarily believe. There's a lot of research out there, there's a lot of work being done, but the last 3 to 4 months would tell anybody that the world has changed and we're going to face some challenges. We don't know what they look like, but we should be ready to face those and to go at them and work hard for the world of sport. Having said that, I'm not a fortune teller or a clairvoyant, but I have put together some ideas of how I think the events world might look like, what sport events may need to do. So again, we can judge those when we come, and I'd love to hear your ideas as we talk through it. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'd like to set the scene, and I just want to give an idea of what the sport industry was and how it operates, absolutely at a very, very high level. I could do a whole webinar or series of lectures on the sport industry and the structure of it and the economics surrounding it. But I think just for the purposes today, so that we all understand what we're talking about when we move on to the look at the future, that we get our terminology right and we understand what we mean within the sports industry. So as a wider sport industry, sport-related GDP was in the region of 300 billion euros for the EU, which was just over 2% of the total GDP for the EU. So that means every 47th euro generated within the EU was generated by sport. So that should tell you how significant an industry sport is. I chose the European information, which I've referenced at the bottom there for anybody that's interested, because it was government source. There was a lot of information out there and it varied widely. And so this is from 2019. It's a government source, so it's a reasonably good one. And with that in mind, also, it was able to provide me with employment figures, which shows that 5.5–6 million people within the EU are employed within sport-related roles, which is 2.7% of the total employment. So every 37th employee works in sport. So that should show us very clearly how significant the sport industry is from a European perspective. We can absolutely apply that to globally. I would argue globally for sure. The North American sports market, the Asian sports market. The industry is absolutely thriving, and a lot of the research I did had predictions of compound growth of 3% per year for the next 3 to 4 years. So the environment was strong, the industry was thriving pre-COVID. I don't think we can say the same at this point in time, but it is important to note. Just for those that are interested, there's a link at the bottom there with the EU publication. It's actually a position paper that the EU Sports Department have put out. It has many signatories from European sports organisations, and it's basically putting a position forward where sport should be. So if you're interested, follow the link and you can find out a little bit more about the politics side of it and the need for economic stability and the request for funds to underpin the sporting industry in Europe. But again, it gives you a very clear idea of what we're talking about. And apologies for those of you not in Europe. The industry itself, so again, massively high level, just looking down, just so we're very clear of what I mean by the structure of the industry in terms of international federations, FIFA. Very, very obvious. There's a whole range of them. Every sport has its own international federation. We also, as part of that, those international federations are rights holders. So they own the rights owners, sorry. They own the rights to, use the FIFA example, own the rights to the World Cup. So they are the rights owner in that instance. I've used WWE as more of a sports entertainment, but they own the rights to all their entertainment issues. There's a clear distinction between a rights owner, an international federation, and a host and an LOC. So hosts and local organising committees, they are based in the physical location in which the event will take place. They are distinct from leagues in terms of they are normally one-off events, major events, and they're expecting to take place. And just some examples from the Olympic world you'll all be familiar with. The Tokyo 2020 organising committee and the Paris 2024, based in the cities and bringing on their own staff. Obviously, they're in communication and they've got agreements in place, host city contracts and the like with the rights owners and the stakeholders, but they are entities in themselves. And then the very last group, just to be clear, as distinct from the hosts, the NOCs, and the rights owners and the IFs, we have the wider stakeholders and partners. These are the people that drive the sport industry, that drive the events within sport. So the likes of ESPN, very obvious example of a broadcaster. Everybody has their own broadcaster in their own country. It's a big supporter of sports that brings money in and funds the events that take place. Same again, Red Bull as an example of a sponsor. Billions of dollars worth of sports sponsorship that drives the industry. But wider than those, we ourselves are stakeholders in sports. We are, whether we're spectators, whether we are administrators, or whether we're businesses and agencies within sport, we're all contributing, whether we're working in the media or working for sponsors as as consultants, whatever that looks like, we're all stakeholders. So these are the wider groups of the industry that we would split and look across, and that then helps us to understand the different how the industry is broken up in terms of what events might look like and how that might be. So we look at the likes of events that are leagues and competitions series, the likes of UEFA Champions League. We'll all be familiar with that. We're all very familiar with the format, when it takes place, how it works, how to qualify for it. All of these types of things are very clear. The ATP World Tour, again, these are very clear leagues and competitions, and they run, over longer periods of time. They're annual competitions. They come back. They're owned by the rights owners. They're not necessarily, a single host, a host city. They're very different to what would be the major multi-sport events or the major events, single sports such as the Olympics, or we've got Euro 2020 there as an example. These are standalone events, but they're obviously on a cycle, and they're major events. So they're distinct. And again, there's a final distinction with terms of entertainment. So again, using the example of WWE, it's very different from leagues and competitions and very different from major events. So you can see the distinctions there. And as we move through the discussion today, I'll be citing different elements of different things. And again, kept a very high level, just brushed over the top of it, just so we're all very sure of what we're talking about at the moment. Which takes me to the point where we'll move into, that was the sport, that's what it looked like. I don't see those structures changing greatly, but the environment has changed massively. So looking at the environment and why and how it's changed is very, very important. As I mentioned, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I think it was important to understand some of the science behind what's been going on and why it has been taking place. So for me, there's a very good study, or a very good paper, that's been put together by Imperial College London, and it's discussing the impact of non-pharmaceutical interventions with a view to reducing, mortality and healthcare demand. We've all heard about flattening the curve. We've all heard about the things that we're trying to do in order to reduce the impact of COVID-19, and obviously the mortality rates in some places are terrible. So, again, everything we can do, it's important to do that. So for me, it was important to understand what was the driving factors, what was the scientific basis for the measures that are being taken by governments today that ultimately impact what we're doing in our day-to-day lives and what we're doing as sports organizations. So for me, it shows me, the Imperial College London paper shows me very clearly, the measures that they recommend to limit transmission. They discuss very clearly the potential of a rebound in transmissions. And only this week, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in the USA, made a warning about the potential in autumn and winter for an even worse outbreak of COVID-19. So it's to be aware of what we're actually dealing with. And finally, I suppose, which is key for our industry, was just the discussion around the requirement for a vaccine or an effective treatment, and the realization and the harsh truth that actually we won't have an effective vaccine within the next 18 months. I'm aware that trials have started in the US, they've started in the UK and Germany also, but given that it's a phase, it's a difficult, challenging thing. There's 3 phases to go through in terms of the initial safety, then the animal testing, and the human testing. The likelihood of having something in place, in under a year, certainly in under 18 months, is very, very challenging. So, and there's no guarantees that it'll be effective. So it's worth us understanding as our industry that actually we may not be able to go back to the norm immediately. We'll be very, very unlikely to do that within the next 18 months. And who knows what that will look like for the next, 2-3 years. So it takes the onus back on us to start thinking about event delivery within sport in a different way. Okay, so you'll see that I see that Gemma's kindly been putting the links to the publications there, so you can click in and read at your leisure. This is available in both English and Spanish, so hopefully that will suit most of our listeners today.
Mm-hmm. We can start, Mark, if you want, with the first questions.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think that they are already related on you've been talking till now. Felipe is asking which are the challenges for the locks after COVID-19, the local organizers committees.
So what are the challenges for the LOC? Well, I suppose I will address the challenges for everybody in the future. And as part of that, the LOCs, I do discuss about host destinations and things. But initially, I think the key point and the very short answer to this is public safety is paramount. So organising committees and LOCs cannot begin to function correctly, to do their normal day-to-day business. They cannot begin to plan. They cannot be sure of what the environment will look like in the coming years. So obviously it puts their planning into disarray. It leaves them with many, many open questions. And unfortunately, a lot of what's going to be possible will be driven by individual governments and the policies that individual governments put in place. So all LOCs are not equal, because they're obviously delivering different sports and different events, which obviously face different challenges. They're not equal because they're in different locations with different governments. They're in different locations with a different profile in terms of the pandemic and the impact it's had on their society. So I would say that anybody who's currently working in a local organising committee will be looking for some certainty. And I suppose my message is to them the same as the wider world of sport, is start building in as many contingencies to look at the ways that they're going to deliver with COVID-19 in mind, so that they can deliver. So it's probably just brushed over that question slightly, but we will address the challenges of host cities in the future. And if Felipe would like to come back at the end, happy to go into it in a little bit more detail if you'd like.
Mm-hmm. And related to that question, Elmis is pointing out that what do you think is going to be the major skills that will be on demand with the sports industry during and after coronavirus?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And I think obviously the skills that were required to run major sports events, the experience that a lot of people have in the industry, the methods and the modes of delivery that are currently in place, those will, in my opinion, they will morph, they will change, but ultimately they'll stay the same. So people that have those experiences absolutely, are still well placed. But I think from my point of view, I think it's going to take a little bit of imagination. I think that we have to be open to new ideas. So I think that those with imagination and open-mindedness and an ability to take the information and come up with new strategies and come up with new innovations are going to be the people that succeed the most coming out the back of the COVID-19 epidemic. That's for sure. Whether that's in a event delivery capacity, or whether that's from a broadcaster's point of view, or any other stakeholder in sport, I think those that devote their time now during the lockdown while they can, if they can, to coming up with new ideas will be the ones that succeed, down the line.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's continue, Mark.
Okay.
Are you wanted to drink, please?
No, I'm fine, thanks. I can talk all day. It's fine. Okay, so coming off the back of the scientific background and the papers involved, governments have been using particular measures that are recommended by the scientific community in order to reduce the spread or stop the transmission from person to person. So these measures, we're all, or most of us are probably living under them at the moment. We're all experiencing travel bans, the amount of air travel, the amount of borders that have been locked down, it's unprecedented. I've never seen it in my time. In my work, I'm very often in a plane, traveling to different locations, working with different groups. So it's very unusual for me not to be traveling. Same with the likes of the quarantines and lockdowns. We're all, there are different policies and different measures in place depending on what nation and region you're in. But for the most part, a lot of the world is currently in full lockdown, where we're only allowed to leave, for essential groceries or for a small amount of exercise. And even when we do, we have to be mindful of social distancing. We have to be mindful of personal protective equipment when we go places. So the whole thing has changed. The measures that have put in place, are fairly extreme, and the impact that's had on us as an events industry within sport has been massive. So the key one for me, and I'm in the UK, I'm in Edinburgh. The UK has shut down all non-essential businesses. This is not unique to the UK. As such, sport has been deemed a non-essential business and has been completely shut down, which for many of us, that's the norm. So it's a difficult time. Sport stopped. There's a limit on social gatherings, so there's a very small amount of people that can get together. There's a requirement for PPE in any business setting, and there's a closure of facilities, so golf courses, parks, training facilities. So you can see the effect on sport, even were sport to be made an exception to some of these rules and allowed to begin, the limits on social gatherings, the requirement for PPE, the closures of other facilities, makes the resumption of sport virtually impossible. So it's a pretty dire situation in most countries with regard to the athletes, with regard to the rights owners, the leagues, the event organisers. It's just not possible at the minute. And I am aware that some of the restrictions are lifting. I'm aware that the Bundesliga in Germany are looking for a resumption in the next few weeks. Obviously, the measures they're going to put in place, we'll discuss in the future. So it's an ever-evolving scenario. Things are changing. Things are looking different as the weeks progress. So hopefully we'll be able to, be beyond these restrictions and can actually do something. So it's a challenging time, no doubt. Give some real-life examples of the impact of these restrictions. So these are massive, world-class, major events that are highly desirable from a spectator point of view, from a broadcaster point of view, from a sponsor point of view. They literally generate billions. And we've seen the Champions League and NBA, so the likes of leagues all over the world, certainly all across Europe, maybe with the exception of Belarus. I understand they're still competing and have basically been postponed. So the distinction there is they're postponed. They have a desire to continue at a point. They believe they'll be able to complete their seasons. They'll be able to meet the requirements of the league. They'll be able to meet the desires of the sponsors and the broadcasters and finish. Okay. The next distinct group here is those that have rescheduled. Some of the events that have just accepted that actually it would be impossible to continue to deliver in this environment, and actually we need to reschedule. It's impossible to host the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in Japan. So in agreement with the IOC, the Japanese government, the Tokyo Organising Committee, and the Tokyo government, it's been postponed for a year. Makes complete sense. Very much the same with the UEFA and its host cities. So these are reschedules. These obviously have major challenges in themselves. They're going to have to renegotiate many contracts. They're going to have to talk to their broadcasters and their sponsors and work out what the contracts might look like in the future. They're going to have serious conversations with the venue owners, with the support services, with the government agencies that they work with. But again, the plan is to reschedule and host it a year later. There have been questions asked about, Tokyo from, a Japanese scientist only this week is suggesting that actually, depending on how the pandemic is distributed across the world, there could be serious outbreaks still, even in a year's time. I suppose it goes back to the vaccine and whether there's a vaccine in place by that time. We're casting doubts on whether the Tokyo 2020 can go ahead in 2021. Having said that, the IOC have said there's very much clearly no plan B. The organisers have said the same. So the plan is to run it as such, but it's a serious issue, and these mega events have been pushed. And the final category, those that have been completely cancelled. They probably are more distinct because they have versions in 2020, and if they pushed into 2021, they'd be impinging on those events. They're also parts of seasons, parts of world tours. So again, it's much more challenging. And so the Wimbledon Championships and the Open Golf have been completely cancelled. Fortunately, they've had good insurance policies, I read recently that you know, the Wimbledon Championships have an insurance payout of 144 million US dollars based on a policy that we're paying $2 million a year for. So again, the impact to them is bad, but it's been mitigated by good planning and good contingency planning. So again, this is just the real life reality of what we're dealing with and what COVID-19 has done to the sport events industry. Okay, so just to, you know, take it beyond the examples that I gave you, and there's a great agency, a great organization, Two Circles, and they've done some work. They've looked at nearly 50,000 events that were scheduled for 2020, sports events specifically, and by their prediction, they believe that only 53% of those events will take place. So you can see from the diagram there that up until, you know, February, March, many of these events took place, and there's an assumption that in August they can begin to increase again. But you know, the restrictions have had a massive impact on sport. They've had a massive impact on our ability to host events. And at this point in time, you know, the strategies being employed by the rights owners and the leagues is very much focused around the, you know, looking at ways in which they can amend their formats, change their timings in order to complete those leagues, in the absence of current information and current content. They're using archive footage, historical documents, social media content to drive that. But that's a very short-term strategy. And actually, I think many of us are getting very, very tired of seeing the old things over. Our desire for new content for live sport is massive. So, you know, we're going to have to at some point begin to move back into that live sport market. How we do that, again, is up for discussion. But even that 53% that's discussed there, I would be, you know, slightly cynical and question whether that's even possible. I'm all for positive thinking, and I believe that people are looking positively to a few months in the future, but I'm not sure we'll even reach that 53%, but I'd love to be proved wrong on that one. Okay, and so the impacts on the organizations, on the federations, on the teams, on all of the different stakeholders have been massive. You know, the financial risk, the organizations are financially unstable, they're unable to generate income, many of them do not have major reserves, so they're at financial risk. That puts the players at risk, it puts the staff at risk, so the whole of our industry, you know, it's at serious risk. The longer we're locked down, the more difficult this will be for us. And in the absence of any replacement for that, you know, organizations are hemorrhaging money. Many examples of this across the world. I've just put a couple of that. So USA Rugby, the National Federation for Rugby in the US has filed for bankruptcy under Chapter 11 and needs to be restructured, refinanced. Rugby Australia, as the example there, 60% pay cut averaged across the board for all their players. So these are major, and these are only after 1 or 2 months of lockdown. You know, the true picture of what it's actually going to look like for sports organizations, we will not know. We will absolutely not know for a few months. We don't know how they're built, how their reserves are in place, and so we're not sure what that's actually going to look like. A very, very challenging position. Very much the same with sponsorship. So IEG have put a paper together, it's linked there, and they suggest that there's a $10 billion gap in the US market for sports and entertainment for sponsorship. So the key message there is sponsorship is a massive part of the information, the income of our leagues and our rights owners. These organizations that sponsor them are going to want to see that money back. So they're not going to be investing new money until they realize that investment. So they're going to expect that if the league is pushed out to the end of the year, they're going to expect that their sponsorship runs through. They're going to be looking to invest, obviously, in the future seasons in whatever guys they look like, but they want to get their current value. And actually, 62% of sponsors are reevaluating their spending just to that point. They want to get as much as they can out of it. And actually, in a more negative position, 20% are looking to decrease their outlay. That's obviously a function of, you know, their their own economic challenges. But again, a 20% reduction in sports sponsorship would have a massive impact on our ability to keep running sport in the way we have previously. Again, very much a similar situation with regard to broadcasting. On a short-term basis, many broadcasters can assume some of the losses. They can be patient and wait for the sport to begin to host events again, for leagues to begin to run again. But that's not a long-term solution. They're going to need to see these things sooner rather than later. And a great paper done, or a great study done by Good Form in conjunction with iSport Connect on the impact of COVID-19, released this month, shows very clearly that 68% of broadcasters, or believe the rights owners in the leagues, believe that broadcasters are going to withhold payments. So, two-thirds, more than two-thirds, understand that they're not going to receive the money from broadcasters that they would expect, and the challenges that's going to put on them in order for them to run the business and to pay is going to be huge. And I suppose that also is true, and it maybe comes into the conversation that Felipe asked earlier about local organising committees. Well, it's very much the same for local organising committees, because they, according to the study by BCW, Burton Cohen Wolf, they've suggested that actually event host destinations, they're looking at a massive financial loss. 78% of them believe they're going to have financial losses in 2020 due to the cancellation. There's a little bit of positivity there. They see that there's going to be a high impact in 2021, but they believe, a lot of them believe that the future will be good. And I'd ask you to read that article. It's very interesting. The study is very, very interesting indeed. But again, it just adds more pain to the industry, because a lot of the costs that are borne for events are borne by the host cities. It's borne by their government agencies. And obviously, with the fiscal policy and economic interventions of governments that are spending billions of dollars in the US, trillions, they're not going to have the money in the same way that they had in order to host events. So that's going to change the nature of it. It's going to put more and more pressure onto sports organizations. And unfortunately, it's a very, very bleak picture. I don't think it's terrible. I don't think we can't get through it, but I think the reality of it is worth understanding, so that we can understand the measures we need to take and how extreme some of those measures need to be in order to get back out there and get the events going again. With that in mind, I did have a plan to put together some great information on what sports are currently doing, what the industry's doing to provide content. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, most organizations are focusing directly on, re-establishing what they're going to do in the future, focusing on contingency plans, abilities to get their leagues up and running again, rescheduling of their standalone events and where they can take place. Very few are actually creating unique, novel content for the market at this moment in time. And on a personal level, I would love to be watching sport, any type of sport right now. So some great examples of guys that have innovated. Not many, and maybe you listening at the moment would have some examples of yourself, but certainly from me, World Ultimate Strongman, they're putting on a series of world record attempts with the greatest strongmen in the world. They're streaming this live. It's been streamed through Core Sport. So they're giving you top-class athletes doing top-class sport, but from their homes. So they're still adhering to all the measures in place from their government, but they're actually creating live sport. Secondly, there's another good example of the Professional Darts Corporation, PDC in the UK. Obviously, they've got athletes in other parts of the world that are part of this, but literally darts competitions every night, free from people's homes. So they compete against each other, but from their own homes, and they use technology to do that. So great innovations, great to get live sport out there, and hats off to these guys for putting the investment in there to do that, and hopefully a success. On the other hand, slightly disappointing that a few more haven't come to the table and put some great sport out there, but I'm hopeful that that will happen as people start to innovate during this time. So that takes us to the future, what we're all probably here for, and why we logged in today to listen to this. Again, I don't wish to be bleak, but I have just shown some economic information there. It's from the IMF. the International Monetary Fund, again, using a government organization, but a global one to predict. So sport doesn't happen in isolation. We don't deliver our events and run sport that isn't subject to the economies in which we operate. So the prediction is advanced economies, Europe, United States, such like are going to have a 6% contraction. So basically, we're going to have a recession for the second half of 2020. A lot of economic hardships there. That's difficult for sport. That plays into the amount of money that sponsors are available, the amount of money that even spectators can pay for, subscriptions to TV channels, whatever that may be. That economic impact will have an impact on sport without a shadow of a doubt. So that just exacerbates the problem. But what it doesn't do is stop us from trying to look at ways of offsetting that incredible loss of income. So for me, we accept there's going to be a loss of income. There has been, there will be. We accept that we're not in a sporting scenario going to be able to be bailed out of this by our stakeholders, our broadcasters, our sponsors. We're going to have to accept some hardship in this, but we're also going to have to work incredibly hard and put extraordinary measures into place in order to get sport happening again. That's the key message. Until we can begin to deliver events, we can't begin to generate the income. I think it's as simple as that. And I'm not sure there'd be too many arguments for that. So a key point for me is, and I mentioned this earlier, I believe that sports organizations must be proactive. We must come to the table with options and scenarios and plans and ways of delivering our sport that are acceptable from a public health scenario. So we must be in a position where we can deliver sport that doesn't put people at risk. That will mean that we have to move away from our traditional models. We have to endure some hardships and some compromise in order to do that. And as the measures are reduced, or as the herd immunity or the ability for treatment or the availability of a vaccine become more prevalent, then we can come back to the way we're doing things, or we can innovate and move forward. But I don't think in the industry we can fully believe, that we can stick to the way we've been delivering things. I could do a whole series of lectures on event delivery and the modes and methods and how we do different events in different ways. But I think, for this time, we have to accept that those are in place, but we're going to have to change that. We're going to have to change them radically. So what I'd like to do is just put forward some ideas. I'd love to hear your ideas, or whether you believe these are possible or not. What's acceptable, what's not. Just put these ideas forward to help any organization put a plan in place so they could actually go to their government, show that they're safe, show that they're ready to begin hosting events again, and move on from there. One little disclaimer: all things are not equal, all sports are not equal. So these might work for some, but not for others. Just using a very quick anecdotal example, for me to host a game of rugby with 50,000 spectators, with athletes in close proximity and actual physical contact, is very different from me to host a surfing event based on a beach with live broadcast where nobody's in interaction and there's no spectators. So much of these things I've actually taken to the more difficult extreme that would be applicable for the sports such as football or rugby or major cricket or American football. These type of high density sports which have got lots of spectators, they're the most challenging sports. Hence where I've approached the mitigating strategies. That's the view I've taken. So with that in mind, putting normal event management procedures to the side and just assuming that we're willing to make amendments, the first thing that's very obvious is if we want to begin sport, we're going to have to do it behind closed doors. We're going to have complete removal of spectators. That's the easiest way. So literally, we reduce the number of client groups. We literally focus on the technical officials, the athletes, the coaches, and we go from there. That gives us the best opportunity, and it's also the most simplistic way. I'm very mindful of the downside of that. Even the exclusion of people from watching their teams, the terrible impact it would have on broadcast, the lack of atmosphere. Many sports are done behind closed doors because of sanctions, because of cry bad behavior. These are punishments at times. So actually becoming the norm would not be the way forward. But certainly in the short term, in order to complete leagues, in order to meet contractual expectations of our stakeholders, that's the way. A little bit less is the second point, where we can still bring spectators into stadiums, but we've got to massively reduce the overall capacities. We're literally talking about bringing them down to a quarter, maybe less, of the overall capacities, so that we can continue to host events, have spectators, but still meet those requirements. Again, the next point is not very palatable. It's actually the complete reduction and removal of travelling support and bans and international attendance. Again, it's responsible for us to do that, but you can't travel to see your team. So your team plays, or your athlete you support, or even a family member is competing internationally, can't be done. It's difficult, but it's definitely a measure to put in place. Following that, I think there's actual processes we can put in place from a management of a venue, from a management of an event in a facility, where we can begin to have a reduced capacity, but actually phase the ingress and egress of those that do attend based on timings, asking certain groups, easily determined by ticket status. You're an A group or B group, or you're blue or you're green. You need to come 2 hours before kickoff or 2 hours before the start of competition. You're a different group, you come 30 minutes. So we have those different ways of putting practical in place to overall reduction in the total capacities, but actually overall reduction in the numbers of people at any one given time. Hopefully, again, showing responsibility to our governments that we can host these events, we can host them with spectators involved, and actually we can move ahead. Again, some other examples of that would be restrictions within stadiums, not allowing people to move freely, single entry points, and only into the area and section that you're in with a reduced capacity. Again, very, very doable. And at those modified queuing points, social distancing, markers on the ground, special channels you go through, disinfection and sanitation points to ensure that everybody's in there. That extends to the next point on vulnerable groups, ensuring that these people can attend, whether that's by allowing them to drive into the stadiums, allowing them to use specific channels, use boxes that they can actually be ensured that they're able to attend, or again, very harsh, but complete exclusion for their own safety. Again, it's not just your time in the stadium, it's actually how you get there, who you interact with before and after. So, we would probably be looking to implement no public transport, no supporter buses, traveling by individual cars within family groups, which then dictate that we need to have additional parking, put additional measures in place in order for those people to get from their parking into the stadium safely. So again, these are all practical implications, and I think, if we put this all together in proposals and strategies, and we make them specific to our events and to our venues, it just shows that we've taken it seriously and we're putting something in place that can actually do this. Again, this might be government mandated, but we could end up having PPE requirements for masks or gloves in order to enter stadiums. Again, I would make that compulsory from an organizer's point of view in order to show that we're willing to make sure that people are safe. I think that sends the message that we can begin to put sport back on again. It's all theoretical, but actually the practical implication is important, because it is looking after public health, and it is showing our responsibility as an industry. Once again, we're looking after our supporters in terms of staff and equipment we put in place, infrastructure we put in place to protect that staff when they do that. That's again important. So it's not just the people that attend to view it, it's actually those that work there. And I think that's a responsible thing to ensure that we're not putting anybody else at additional risk that we don't have to. That's absolutely key for me. And again, plays into the hands of ensuring that we're being responsible. Again, we've mentioned this, and in terms of maybe a change in format, in order to take forward, we maybe reduce the way we do sport. We reduce the fields with the number of athletes. We still put on great sport, but we don't do it in the same way, in order to show, well, a game of football is very difficult, but in terms of a tennis competition or a golf competition, we absolutely can reduce the field. We absolutely can ensure that there's a reduction in the additional people involved so that we can actually host that. And that moves into the second point in terms of some sports, there would be a need to ensure that, those taking part in the sport, I used the example of rugby, close contact, the likes of judo or wrestling, things like that. We need to ensure that they've been tested and are not carrying any disease that's transmittable to their opponents or even their own teammates, and or they've had a confirmation of their immunity. So they've had it and they've done their immunity test and it's been confirmed. So before we can compete, we need to look at that, which is why some sports are well suited to that, are better suited than others. And that's something that each individual rights owner, each league, each team needs to start looking at now in order to how they would implement that type of thing to ensure that their athletes can compete. Some sports are going to have more challenges. For example, I used the rugby. You can't just open up the lockdown next week and expect rugby players to start competing. There has to be a lead-in time. There has to be time where they can train together. They can build, their resistance up again, their resilience in order to the contact that's involved to then go out and, compete against other guys just for their own safety. So there's many, many challenges. So could we start looking at opening up the facilities and training and allowing these guys, if they've all met these requirements, to begin with a view to beginning the season again. So these are all things that really should be put in place right now or as soon as possible, with a view to getting the events beginning again. And it's probably a very harsh last point that I'm going to make on this, and it's the use of certain facilities in stadium. So I used the example here of the Cardiff City Stadium, and obviously you can see it's a modern built stadium. It's got a lot of ground adjacent to it, which would allow me as an event organizer to put many different mitigating strategies into place, many different ways in and out of the stadium. Sorry, I think we lost you there for a second. Many ways in and out of the stadium, and that would allow us to, be a lot safer. Other grounds are not just, if you take the example of Anfield, and it's in the middle of a city and it's through residential areas, doesn't give us the same scope for allowing for transport by car, for avoiding other areas of the public. So again, it's horses for courses. We have to see what stadiums are available, what the best stadiums are, and begin to use those to our advantage. So if we have to play games away from your home stadium, fine. If we have to host events away from your own place, your own normal place of competing, no problem. Let's do that. And just work hard to get these events going again. So that's my theory on some of the event mitigation strategies I would put in place. I think the next thing to look at would be, alternative strategies. So rather than just try and host what we hosted before, can we do something different? Can we look to it in a different way and create something different? So that takes the form of new sports and new event products. So prior to COVID-19, we've seen the rise of basketball 3-on-3, a modified version of the 5-on-5 basketball. We've seen beach volleyball. We've seen a whole range of other sports. I've seen beach wrestling recently. So there is precedence there for rights owners and events and leagues to become more creative. And I think through this point in time, with the mitigating factors you need to put in place to run your events, is there a way to reduce the burden on that by putting new format out there, new sports products? And I think as a community, as viewers, as supporters of sport, we'd be very open to that. We'd love to see new things. We'd love to see exciting things. That doesn't mean we can't use some of the same athletes. Now, think of the example of tech ball, and using a table that's maybe 4 athletes in a competition can still be the best footballers in the world, but we're doing it in a different way. I know it's not the same as a game of football, but certainly it offers something at this period. And I think formats is hugely important in terms of new products, just amending your current sports formats to allow you to do something immediately, to allow you to move forward. Absolutely vital, and certainly something that we can do. The next point for me would absolutely be the use of technology. We're not going to be able to fill stadiums. We're not going to be able to all attend sports the way we want to do. But there is technology out there with augmented reality, virtual reality, readily available, reasonably priced, that would allow us to consume sport in a different way. It needs to be developed, it needs broadcasters, it needs the rights owners, it needs infrastructure in the stadiums to make it what it is, but it can absolutely be done. And I think it's something that now is the time to do that as a catalyst, for driving this forward. It's been there. Now is the time to take the negatives of COVID-19 or COVID of 2019 and actually turn that into something positive. And that leads into the same point with regard to the modes and methods of consuming sport content. We all like the TV. We sit down at a fixed time and we watch that. That's been changing. We've been repackaging sport, making it more compatible with the digital age, consuming it via social media, consuming it in a condensed way. I don't see why we can't look to bring sport into that. The actual events we run, using that through different channels, different modes, and actually changing the formats and the products we've got to make them punchier and actually more interesting to people. And obviously a wider group would then engage in that. The next generations would see that in a different way. And I suppose that's the same with esport. There has been a move towards esport. I know they've established an International Esports Federation aligned with the IOC and looking to be part of the games of 2024, 2028. I know a lot of organizations, international federations, UCI, I've worked with Swift, and they've got an esport cycling game, and this is something that's been happening. This is an opportunity now to accelerate that discussion, to start creating other things that are a combination of esport and reality. I use the example, we work with clients at DCL, Drone Champions League, and they've got a digitized version of a game and a real life version of their drone racing championships that they host. So they bridge that gap. There's absolutely no reason why others can't do the same. So for me, I think if you're looking for inspiration, these are the areas you want to be looking at, taking your own product, where you are at the moment, your own event, and seeing how you can implement that. Just as a note, I put an image in there for, excuse my pronunciation if there's any Danish, FC Midtjylland are offering to host their games in a drive-through scenario. So quite a tongue-in-cheek version of it. But again, they've innovated. They're going to show content. They're going to allow spectators to come in cars. Love it. Different strategies, innovation. And I suppose that's my final point. The innovation, the opportunities. There's a chance to get out there, to use what we have, our experience, our knowledge, to engage with technology, to understand that structures may not change fundamentally, but the ways in which we deliver them absolutely will. What they will look like and how they will look, are absolutely important. So the key message from me is that mindset of growth and creativity and understanding that there's possibilities, despite things being bleak as they currently stand, despite being the tragedy that many nations have gone through and the potential for some more to be in those positions in the future. We as an industry, we have to understand that public safety is paramount, but actually we are here and we can do something about this, and we can strategize and we can put together plans, and we can actually, save our industry from what is fairly dire consequences. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of inspiration. I hope that it's given you an idea of, or it's generated some ideas or some food for thought that you can go out there and begin to, apply this to your own scenario and do great things. And, going forward, I would absolutely here to help. If anybody would like to contact me, obviously you have me through my social media channels, but Quantum Consultancy, if you're interested, there's our details there. We can absolutely, support anybody, even in basic discussions or, formalizing any of these strategies so that you can take them forward, and the last thing I'd like to say is that it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and thank you. And, I hope that it's done something, and more than happy to answer any of the queries, because I'm very aware that I've talked at you now for the best part of an hour, and, hopefully you've managed to follow most of that, and it's been interesting.
Thank you, Mark. Lots of information and many questions coming up on the Q&A panel. So just let's start with it. Yeah. Menelos is asking how this pandemic will affect ticket prices for events like football matches, motorsport races. What do you think about that?
It's a very good question, and it's a very, very good question. And I think, again, without being a clairvoyant and knowing the future, there's two things to think about. First of all, is we mentioned that the overall economy is likely to be in a little bit of a free fall. That 6% number could turn out to be worse. So people will not have readily cash available to spend a lot on tickets. So the hope is that some of those market forces would drive tickets down. However, those market forces are also driven by supply and demand. So if we're going to reduce capacities in order to ensure the social distancing, to keep people safe, a massive reduction in capacities is likely to see an increase in tickets. So as an organization, as a rights owner, as a league or an entertainment organization, they're going to have to make serious decisions on whether they want to continue to put their normal standard fans that are, potentially season ticket holders and not make it exclusive for only those that are rich, or whether they're going to want to recap as many of their lost earnings by increasing ticket prices. And I think that will come down to an individual basis. I think as spectators and fans, and as administrators working in this environment, we need to be very clear, and we need to make our thoughts known in this. And my hope would be that it doesn't cause an increase, but in many instances, I believe it will.
Clear. Roslyn, talking about economy as well. She says if an event gets cancelled, all parties, for example, the right holders, sponsors, everybody, some financial loss is gone. So who bears the losses, or whether they are taking from cash reserves of each party? Could you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, so much of that will be dependent on the contractual position. So, for example, if you're the rights owner, if you're the league, and you don't host the event, you're immediately generating no income from the host of that event. The only way in which there would be any way of recouping any costs is whether some of that money was paid up front. So in terms of some of the football leagues, some of the broadcast money is paid up front. It's staged over time. For example, the broadcasting rights to the IOC, to the Olympics, they're kept in escrow and they don't get paid until the opening ceremony. So, for example, some sponsors and some broadcasters are massively exposed and some are not. So the answer to the question will come back to the specifics of each contract and the way in which they operate. I would assume that if we don't complete seasons and we don't host the same number of games, that actually it will be the rights owner that foots most of the bill. Will have to come from the reserves, because the sponsors and the broadcasters and even those that have bought tickets will all expect refunds. I don't see there being any way around that, unless they offset that into next season or the season beyond, in terms of they change their deals and they make it a longer term, so they don't actually recoup the money, but they just change the structure of the deal, which again has an impact, because overall that will reduce the income from the organisation, which will have a direct impact of the next 2 to 3 years on the ability to play teams, ability to pay players, the ability to pay staff, the amount of money involved for agencies and supporters to actually access. So that's why I'm very mindful that although it looks difficult and bleak now, and I use some examples of USA Rugby already in administration, I do believe that a lot more clubs, a lot more entities within the sport will find themselves in very, very difficult times and will require government bailouts, or will actually fail. Unfortunately, that's a harsh truth.
Mm-hmm. Talking about players and staff members, Akil is asking, how will this pandemic affect recruiting of players and new staff members?
Again, I suppose I answered much of that in the last question with regard to which sports entities are which leagues, which players, which clubs, have strong balance sheets. Have they got reserves? Have they got backers? Have they got, for example, even the oil prices crash? Does that affect Man City's ability to purchase players? So without any shadow of a doubt, the economic situation has a direct impact on the ability for clubs to pay transfer fees. It also has a direct impact on player wages. So all of those that have current contracts in place, I believe that most clubs will look to honour that. But going forward, I suspect that there'll be a deflation in the wages across the board, certainly in the lower leagues, maybe at the very highest levels where clubs still generate a lot of money with various different streams of income. They might be protected, or they might have a $1 billion backer that's willing to help them. But across the board, I do think there'll be a lot less transfers, or those transfers will be a lot reduced, and the players' wages will be reduced. Again, from the data, people are positive. There are green shoots. They do believe that in 1 or 2 years, like 2021, a lot of the research says that people believe that we'll be back to normal. So, as any growth industry, as any economy, you might have a recession, but quite often you move again straight into the good times, and you begin to grow. So even if there is a reduction, I don't believe there's a new world order. I don't believe it will change. I think in the future, with these high-end competitive sport, and certainly football, they will be competing for the best players. They will pay for them, but maybe not just so much at this particular point in time.
Mm-hmm. Eva is asking, do you think organising Euro 2020 in next year should take place just as planned so far, with 12 venues around Europe, or considering all challenges and risks that might still be next year, it could be safer to change the format? So
it's a very interesting one, and I hope not to get in trouble with UEFA from saying this, but that's a difficult question I've just been asked. My first reaction is actually that what's being offered by UEFA is in the most part, it's actually very, very good, in terms of, if you consider that we won't be bringing, if you consider UEFA could still hold the championships in multiple cities, in multiple venues, but actually only allow local fans to attend. Again, it's very unpalatable, but actually the fact that they've not held it in one country actually makes it a more viable option, because there's many more fans in many more cities that can actually attend. If we're looking at allowing fans to travel to different locations and to travel from, for example, from the UK to Baku to watch a game, and I just don't see that happening. I just don't think it's possible. I think nation states and borders will not allow the mass movement of people for this reason. So what I think the strategy may be is looking to fill stadiums, or whatever capacities may be, with local fans, rather than having people travel across borders to do that. So again, there's a positive side to that, and there's a massive negative, but I don't see the ability to move to 2022. I just don't think that's we're getting, it's World Cup year. You can't effectively have a European Championships and a World Cup in the same year. So it's got to be 2021. It may be reduced, it may be compromised in some way, but actually I do see it going ahead in the current format. But the way in which spectators view it, and the way in which traveling fans, will be very different.
Mm-hmm. Lulian, do you think that in this new situation, smaller competitions, youth local leagues or championships, smaller championships, for example, could think of live streaming as a source of income?
Absolutely. And whoever asked that question is thinking about it the right way. So if you're in a situation where you can begin to hold sporting events again, and there's a demand for that, absolutely. The technology's there. For many small leagues and clubs, it wouldn't be a massive outlay to have a platform to host the streaming live, and there's companies that would do that for you, absolutely. And I genuinely think if that's a situation where you can do that, you should absolutely look in to put that into your plan. The way to generate income from that may be that you charge a subscription fee to your supporters and your fans, or to opposition fans, or you generate sponsorship or income via sponsorship. So again, and that can be done on a local level. So absolutely is the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. And related to the individual sports, if the greatest competitions like the Olympic Games or European competitions are cancelled, makes sense that the national federations maintain the national competitions?
Absolutely. And again, it's back to the point I make. If you can, and within the restrictions of your own governments, absolutely, you know, the complexity of an Olympic Games or to the previous question with regard to European Championships, you know, it's a lot of people moving across borders. It adds a different element of risk. It's from people all over the world traveling. Those are complex and very, very difficult to control and to maintain. Whereas if there are opportunities in, you know, within regions or within countries to go ahead and to fulfill their commitments to their fans, to their stakeholders, absolutely. And to the last point, that can generate income, that can generate, you know, money to save people, to keep people employed. You know, it's absolutely something that planners should be ready to do, you know, and plans should be in place at the moment of how they would do that. You know, it may not be an absolute plan. There may be 3 or 4 different versions of that with different timescales involved, with different mitigation strategies. But now is the time to actually put that in place and to get that out there to your stakeholders. This is what we're going to do. This is what's going to happen, and we will absolutely be going ahead, because what we don't want is a depression in the sport market for people to look to other, you know, whether that's e-sport or entertainment, or move away from sport. You know, we want to continue to build and build, and there's no reason why sport can't be consumed on a local level, you know, first and foremost, you know, before we start meeting the challenges on an international level.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's a good idea to cancel the rest of the National League in England?
The Premier League, do I think it's a good idea to cancel the Premier League? Again, I'm not sure if these are good questions. But on a personal note, as a Liverpool fan, cancellation is absolutely not possible. I do not accept that we can cancel the league without Liverpool being awarded the champions. I've waited nearly 30 years for this, so we must crown Liverpool champions. But more importantly, I think that with the movement of Euro 2020, it's given us a window now during the summer to potentially host the games. You know, I've put forward lots of strategies to mitigate the health risks, and I genuinely believe, you know, we could host those games. It might mean hosting 3 games per week. It might mean, you know, serious, you know, changes to locations where games are played and how they're played, you know, times a day, things like that. But I should have no qualms that, you know, as an organisation, as a Premier League that generates billions of dollars, you know, some of the expertise that they have available to them, they can absolutely put things in place in order to finish the league. Even if that means pushing the start of the 2021 season out, I have no qualms that they will absolutely finish that league. And I very much hope they do.
Mark, do you think that with the new normal situation, governing bodies will be forced to change the current monetary cycles for organizations to avoid bankruptcy?
It's a very good question, and I think the new normal isn't very normal in answer to that question. So the norm changes over the weeks and months, but I didn't want to get too deep into it. But there's an awful lot of organizations that are in dire financial need. We've even seen some international federations, the likes of World Sailing, going to the IOC in order to try and get an advance on their Olympic cycle money. So over every 4 years, the IOC just redistribute the funds from the Olympics to the international federations involved, to the NOCs involved, and via solidarity grants and funds. And already international federations, some of them even have loans to bridge the gap at the moment, which is not a great situation. So if your international body fails, then your national federation is under more pressure because they don't have any access to resource. So I think, I did cite the EU position paper earlier, and they're putting forward a number of initiatives in order to free up funds, in order to reduce the outgoings, reduce the tax burdens, all these type of things in order to keep as many federations going as possible, because I think that it's a genuine risk. I know that many of them have reserves, but I also know that many more don't, and their balance sheets are not healthy enough to last. They don't have the support, the sponsors, the broadcasters can't pay them if they're not paid themselves. Their own international federations can't pay them. So it's a reasonably challenging position. So hence why my take on it was the creation of new content, the look at new ways of introducing revenue in order to offset some of those things. But the harsh reality is many of them will not look like they look like now. They might stave off administration, but they will not have the same members of staff. They will not have the same investment into their own clubs and players. So it's going to be a very, very challenging time, if I'm honest.
How can a team or an athlete do during the lockdown period for its sponsors to create value? I guess that if you can give us some examples.
Well, it's a very, very good question. And the reality is you will never create the same value as completing the Premier League. And individual athletes and the sports stars can absolutely, via their own social media channels, via the social media channels of, their sponsors and supporters, they can absolutely create new content. They can go out there and do things, but ultimately that will not generate the same income as the completion of the UEFA Champions League, the Premier League, La Liga, Bundesliga. These things are just different. So that's not to say that they shouldn't. What they should be doing is engaging with their sponsors, engaging with their fans via the platforms that exist, the creation of new content. They should be open to the new ideas in terms of the ability to take part in different competitions if they're contractually able to do so. Pardon me. I think I used the example of, wouldn't we love to see Ronaldo and Messi play tech ball? Wouldn't we love to see them do something different? If that would generate content and keep everybody, safe, then why not? But truth is, there is limitations to the amount that they will be able to generate.
Talking about Ronaldo or Messi, there is another question related to contract of top players. Do you think that the day after the virus will affect also the contracts of the top players and athletes?
With regard to top players, I think I touched on that earlier. I think it's the supply and demand element is that there is a massive demand for the top talent. So top athletes will still generate a lot of money. Those that are in contracts will most likely have those contracts honored. In the most part, there might be small reductions. I know some teams have already taken pay cuts. I know Barcelona did. I know, a whole range of Premier League players have done this. So there will be drops. But my contention is that these are short term. The way that the markets are set up, the way that the demand is for football, it's all based around success. It's about having the best players, winning competitions, and marketing those players to the world. So there may be at the lower end of the sport a lot of reduction in contracts and a lot of tightening of belts, but at the very highest end we might see a small reduction, a small depression. But I don't see that holding true, for the top players over long periods. I think that they absolutely will continue to earn large amounts of money. I think in general, even pre-COVID, that the balance between incomes with leagues and clubs and the payment of players needs to be addressed. In some sports it's not right. We need to get that right and not overpay and sort of be careful with it. But given the desire and given the way money's generated, you take the PSG model or the Man City model, where they've got, even under FIFA fair play rules, they're still able to use their backers to do amazing things and increase the money spent. I just don't see the top players being overly affected for too long.
Ignacy says that we are talking about professional sports. So what about the amateur sport or young people trying to be professionals and all their teams or coaches and their sponsors? Do you think it's going to be collapsed, or is there time to be creative and doing things?
For me, the question's answered itself. It's absolutely time to be creative. It absolutely is. There will be hardships. There will be federations that do collapse. There will be major issues with administration. There will be a lot less funding, but ultimately sport will prevail. The demand for it will still be there. The opportunities for talented athletes will still be there. The Olympic Games will still exist. All the major sports and leagues will still exist. So the idea is not to be downhearted, to continue to train as possible, but the support may not just be to the level it was previously. And by support, I mean financial support. So probably very difficult for a lot of minority sports, probably very difficult for a lot of like lower end leagues and athletes coming through. But that's not to say that it isn't possible and the rewards are not there in the future. It will just be a difficult time for many, and I think that's a harsh reality that we have to accept, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Talking about that, the opportunities, Grigoria says that, do you believe that this might be an opportunity for some sports to be shown on the TV more due to the stadium maximum capacity restriction? I guess yes.
Absolutely. So this is we talked about the new norm in terms of society, but there could potentially be a new norm in sport. I don't for a moment think that the appeal of football, for example, will change. Absolutely mass, wide appeal will always be there. But it definitely gives us an opportunity for other sports. And those other sports, and I touched on a couple with World Ultimate Strongman and with PDC Darts, these are sports that are starting to build content, put it out there in a period when nobody else is. So I used examples of golf or tennis or surfing. These sports can absolutely continue, a lot easier and a lot quicker than others, and potentially they should. So if you're in a sport that, for want of a better phrase, we would term a minority sport, now's the time to build. Now's the time to put content out there. Now's the time to use whatever resources available that you have in order to engage as many people as possible to allow you to do that. There probably will not be another time where the world order has changed so much, where the sports norm is going to change so much. Now is the time to strike, and now is the time to be there with some great content to build that base for the future. Absolutely. Broadcasters are dying for content, live sport content right now. So if it can be created, your opportunity and your chance to get on live TV is a very, very different prospect than it would have been 6 months ago, for sure.
Sergio Alonso says, what do you think about the coming changes from the point of view of the real actors, the athletes?
Yeah, well, we touched on that in terms of player contracts. We touched on that in terms of, the ability for athletes to generate income. We touched on that in terms of earlier when we're talking about mitigation strategies, their restrictions on their ability to train. So I think this is an incredibly difficult time for athletes. I think, taking the Olympic example, I don't know how Olympic athletes can train. I don't know how they can maximize their ability. And unfortunately, it's no longer a level playing field. So those that have access to facilities in their own home, those that have access to sponsorships that they're able to create content for, those that have, the ability to continue training and continue earning, have a massive advantage over others. And so when we come out of this, not all things will be equal. Not all athletes will have the same opportunities. And that will be dependent on your status as an athlete. It'll be dependent on your geographical location. So it's a very, very tough thing. A lot of, government funding for athletes and for NOCs and for teams may also be reduced when, because the governments have to pay for these economic stimulus that they've put in place. So I do have a lot of sympathy for athletes, many of them not understanding what their contractual situation is, many of them out of contract, this season and unable to pick up a contract at this point in time. It's a very, very difficult situation. I'm involved with the AMG. It's a management company for athletes that provides strategic support for them, and they're working with athletes and they're working very hard in order to get opportunities. We work with IGMA in Peru also, who represent athletes, and they're in the same situation where clubs don't know what the revenue looks like. Event organizers don't know what the revenue looks like. Therefore, they can't guarantee an athlete any revenue. They don't know when their league's starting again, so they can't guarantee when athletes need to begin training and plan for when they need to compete, plan to peak at that point. So very much a difficult situation for athletes, and a lot of sympathy, and I don't actually have a lot of hope in the short term, in the next number of weeks. But, as with these things, athletes are resilient and they'll come out the back end and they'll certainly make the best of it, is my hope and desire.
Diego Tasso says that, can you please share some more good examples of activation that you have seen during this coronavirus period, such as the drive-in for the football match or watch the game from your car? Do you have so many other examples?
It's a very good question. And actually, if I'm being very honest, I've been slightly perturbed about the lack of innovation. This is why you might have noticed a general theme today has been for me to try and encourage that, because, using the examples of the new content created by World Ultimate Strongman or PDC, using the examples of the Danish Football Club, these type of things, I've seen very, very few, and it's slightly disappointing that, for me, I think the focus has been on, let's get through these tough times and then normal service will resume afterwards and we'll do the things we do. I haven't seen many people actually take what they have, change their value proposition, come up with an alternative strategy and do these. So unfortunately, in answer to that question, I am personally looking for people to innovate. I think there's lots of technology options out there. I absolutely believe it can be done. I'm just not seeing it at that point in time, and I have to apologize for not answering the question that well, but the reality is there isn't a lot of great innovation happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the last question, Mark. Okay. Do you think that sports should contribute in a potential new way of an isolated life? Is it a good chance for everyone to rethink the way the modern sports has been built? Sponsors and TV rights are regarded higher than spectators.
Yeah, I think it's, I mentioned that, used the phrase, the new normal for sport. We don't know what that looks like, and when there's a major incident like this, it is a chance to reevaluate where we are and what we do. And I'm very aware that there's a strong feeling that a lot of money in sport is focused on the top end. A lot of money is generated by a small number of rights owners and clubs, and actually the distribution channels throughout all of the sports aren't always fair, aren't always even. So I understand that there is a lot of thinking about that. There is a lot of debate about that. So this is an opportunity. So if there are sporting organizations that are in hardship, well, actually your fans and your supporters are the people that actually will get you through that, as much as your funders via broadcast or sponsorship will do that. So there is a great chance to re-engage. There's a great chance to change the way they do that. And I very much hope that the organizations, in order to save themselves, don't go down the route of overcharging. In answer to the previous question, or an earlier question, I hope it doesn't become an elite thing to go and watch live sport. I hope that it's still a community-based thing. There's a chance that actually we could be using the opportunity to watch live sport in our own communities. We could change the balance. We could go back to having, yes, we have an elite team, yeah, but we also support our local community teams. We change that. We increase that side of the business just to redistribute the wealth, across different levels. And also the reality is that, given the way the broadcast and sponsors are looking for content, looking for opportunity, there is a chance for different organizations at lower levels to start to tap into some of that. It may not be easy, but again, with the challenge comes the opportunity. And I'd like to think that, most people will be, ready for that and able to take the opportunity when it comes.
Okay, Mark. So we've been, exactly 1 hour and a half.
1 hour 30, I see this.
Yes, talking with you about this very interesting topic. I think it's time to leave it here. Just want to thank you very much for your time, for sharing your knowledge with us. We have many questions, so it means that everybody was very interested in your speech.
Yeah, no, I think, Gemma, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Cruyff Institute today, but also I'd like to thank the amount of people that tuned in to listen, and also, thank you for being engaging fully in it. By the look of it, I could have gone for another hour or hosted another webinar to answer all the questions that are there. Obviously there's a desire out there. There's a want for people to have a little bit more clarity. So I'm very pleased I was able to hopefully contribute to that today. And thank you everybody for your time.
Sure, you did, Mark. And I just want to thank everyone for participating. Remember that you will soon receive a link to the webinar recording. We will be delivering new content next week, and you can find all the information on upcoming sessions through our social media channels. I just want to say, stay safe, stay home, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.